Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Number 10. The Stone Circle. A stone circle lost for 4,000 years has been discovered in the forest in England. Archaeologists are hailing it as an amazing find, saying it's the first of its kind in this particular part of Britain. Never before has anyone found a stone circle in the famous Forest of Dean. But the exact location of the circle is being kept a secret because archaeologists fear that if it gets out, looters and treasure hunters will tear the forest apart. You may be wondering, how do experts even go about finding a stone circle lost under 4,000 years of accumulated leaves and sticks? The answer is simple. They use light detection and ranging technology. Through an aerial survey in which lasers scanned the ground for anomalies, scientists were able to create a 3D model of the land. And that was when they spotted a prehistoric circle dating back to around 2200 BC. The circle is 80 feet wide and the rubble around its base is 16 feet thick. Only 10 limestone monuments remain standing, each one covered in years of vegetative growth. The standing stones are much smaller than the ones at Stonehenge, but that doesn't make it any less significant. Researchers think the circle was built by an early community for hosting ceremonies or burials. Most stone circles have been found with at least a bit of human ash in them, suggesting they had something to do with death. However, most experts think they were more ritualistic in nature. It's not as impressive as other stone circles in the world, but its ruins deep in the forest make it extremely intriguing. Number 9. A lost civilization in the clouds? In the green forests of Venezuela, there rises a series of plateaus 9,000 feet above sea level. They look like tabletops about 1,300 feet above the tallest trees below them. Explorers describe them as islands in the sky when they first laid eyes upon the tepuis, which is what they're called. And the most famous of the tepuis is Mount Roraima, a place that could be home to a lost civilization. The tepuis are so unique that they are home to life forms that don't exist anywhere else in the world. There are thousands of plant species that you won't find anywhere except on these islands in the sky. It's such an exotic place that in 1912, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle used Mount Roraima in his book, The Lost World. He said there were extinct creatures still living at the tops of the mountains, unbeknownst to human society. In modern times, nobody has found any dinosaurs here, but that doesn't mean there isn't something mysterious that's waiting to be found. The only people who ever knew about Mount Roraima prior to Europeans were the Pemon Indigenous people. When the region was explored by the National Geographic Society in 1989, German explorer Uwe George reported that nobody saw any primordial creatures or unexplainable fossils. But way before that, in 1595, explorer Sir Walter Raleigh wrote in his notes that he saw a crystal mountain covered in shining diamonds and waterfalls. He may have been talking about the legendary Angel Falls, or maybe he saw something that nobody else has managed to find again. It's such a lost world here that nobody would be surprised if archaeologists or paleontologists eventually find the bones of strange beasts, or the remnants of a sky civilization. What do you think might be found here? Let me know in the comments. Number 8. The Haunted Woodland. One of the spookiest and most haunted forests in the world is located along the northern border of Romania. It spans an impressive 618 acres in Transylvania, and it's known as Oia Baciu. It's considered to be one of the most daunting paranormal hotspots in the world. It's even been called the Bermuda Triangle of Transylvania. Some believe the devil lives here, and others have claimed to see ghosts. But the majority of sightings here involve extraterrestrial activity. It's said a shepherd once disappeared with 200 sheep while trying to traverse the forest, never to be seen again. And apparently a little girl disappeared here, then reappeared 5 years later wearing the same clothes and having not aged so much as a day. There is also the story of a woman who disappeared, then reappeared dazed and confused with a mysterious coin from the 15th century in her pocket. People have wandered out of the forest with unexplainable burns or suffering from a high fever. Unconfirmed scientific studies have shown radiation levels far higher than normal, and many have taken pictures of unidentified flying objects soaring over the trees. It's a truly strange place. But do you really think the forest is haunted? Could it really be attracting intergalactic visitors? Let us know your theories down below. Number 7. Mysterious stone jars. 65 jars crafted from sandstone were recently found scattered throughout the forest in India's Assam state. Some of the jars are tall, while others are small and bulbous. But what researchers are most interested in are the jars that are big enough to hold the bones of 24 men. Some are sitting on the ground, covered in moss, but there are others buried almost entirely in the ground. And what's even more amazing is that the stone jars in India are nearly identical to the ones found in Laos and Indonesia. While India might seem close to Southeast Asia, it's still really far away. Scientists don't have any idea how two totally distinct cultures that lived such great distances from each other were leaving stone jars scattered throughout the woods. It's utterly baffling. Researcher Nicholas Skopal from the Australian National University is one of the perplexed scientists. He said nobody knows who made the giant jars or where they even lived, and archaeologists haven't found much evidence of settlements nearby. It's like the giant jars fell out of an airplane for no reason. Nicholas Skopal said that the ancient Naga people told stories of finding the jars filled with cremated remains and colorful beads, but that was centuries ago. Today, the jars are mostly empty. There are about 700 jars that have been found so far, most of which date back to 400 BC, 2,400 years ago. Number 6. The Medusa Mother Tree. The Medusa Mother Tree is the largest tree in Arizona's Tonto National Forest. Scientists think it's between 600 and 1,000 years old, meaning it's been standing since before Christopher Columbus ever arrived. Firefighters recently rescued the tree following a fire that broke out in the national forest. It was one of the worst wildfires the state of Arizona had seen in years, and locals feared their tree would be burned to cinders. The tree is an alligator juniper, and amazingly, it survived multiple forest fires. It's been around for 1,000 years, and the woods around it have burned plenty of times, but bigger, older trees typically have a better chance of surviving forest fires. It's the difference between throwing a twig or a log into a campfire. The Superstition Wilderness, which is part of the Tonto National Park, is surprisingly close to the city of Phoenix. In fact, it's one of the largest forestry parks in the United States. Tonto got its name from a recluse who lived in the area in the 1870s. He was a hermit who survived by growing potatoes and cabbages. Have you ever been to this park? Let me know in the comments. Number 5. Dr. Gottfried's Secret Lab. Hiding in the forests of Venezuela, there is an abandoned series of laboratories that were used by a crazy German scientist in the 19th century. His name was Gottfried Knoche, and he was born in Germany in 1813. He became a famous surgeon credited with inventing a special type of embalming fluid that could be used to create mummies. He left Germany and arrived in Venezuela in 1840, and there he settled in a coastal jungle and founded a hospital. In the 1850s, Gottfried and his wife worked to care for poor patients, especially those battling the brutal cholera epidemic. While this charitable work was going on, the good doctor was busy experimenting with bodies of dead soldiers fighting in the Federal War. It wasn't that unusual for physicians to do, but still, it was a little shady. Eventually, Gottfried mastered his embalming serum. He came up with a liquid that he could inject into a corpse to keep the body fresh without removing any organs. And in his lab, he kept multiple mummified bodies to study. Before his death, Gottfried arranged for his nurse to embalm him with his mummification serum. Legend has it that he was so obsessed with being mummified that he made his nurse inject the serum into him while he was still alive. Then he had himself locked in a mausoleum. The doctor's faithful nurse died soon after in 1926, and that was the end of the secluded homestead of Gottfried. Over time, it was gradually engulfed by the forest. Eager medical students made pilgrimages into the woodland to look for the doctor's notes. Vandals and looters also tore the property apart. And all these years later, scientists still haven't managed to recreate his embalming serum. The secret of mummification died with Gottfried. His house is still standing in the woods, though it's in terrible condition. Gottfried's laboratory is in ruins, and all the mummies he made are long gone. Why do you think we still haven't been able to figure out Gottfried's recipe for embalming fluid? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you haven't, be sure to subscribe. Number 4. Ancient Poland. Scientists in Poland recently scanned the Bielowica forest using light detection and ranging technology. They measured the landscape with lasers and identified shocking sights all the way from prehistory to World War II. The technique allowed them to strip away the dense jungle and identify a total of 577 ancient burials. They also found 19 ancient strips of farmland and 17 World War II cemeteries. Some of the older burial mounds are from the Roman period around the 2nd century AD, but others are from the Middle Ages. Interestingly enough, the mounds they found from the Middle Ages were the only ones that contained skeletons. Most of the Roman burials had already been dug up, perhaps by curious archaeologists during the medieval period, which would be rather ironic. The researchers say this forested region in Poland was occupied intermittently. Medieval communities emerged at small forest elevations where there was access to a river. They would live here for decades or centuries, then disappear. The scientists also identified a pair of fortified structures, which may have been forest strongholds during the Dark Ages. There was a lot going on here. Number 3. The Witches' Forest. There is a forest in England covered in the markings of witches. It's called New Forest, and it bears the marks of over 500 years of human activity. You're likely familiar with the term geoglyph, referring to glyphs made by carving into the earth. Well, in New Forest, there are things known as arbor glyphs, pictures etched in the trees. One of the most common pieces of graffiti in the forest is the King's Mark. It's a symbol that sort of resembles an arrowhead, used by the British Navy to mark which trees were good for building ships. But when Great Britain started using iron and steel to build its boats instead of wood, many of the trees were spared. And today, those spared trees still bear the mark of their doom. The more ghoulish glyphs in the forest are its witch marks. According to historic England, the symbols were etched into the trees to keep evil spirits out of the woods. They were carved either as simple circles or as a pair of V's. Most were made starting in the 16th century, but the practice continued right up until the end of the 19th century. This was a time of serious superstition in England. Witch markings can be found in old caves and etched into the walls of medieval inns. They can even be seen on the outside of old churches. They weren't made by witches with broomsticks, but by people hoping to keep the witches away with magic sigils. Would you be afraid of witches in the forest? Let me know in the comments. Number 2. Lost City of the Mountains. A lost city was discovered in the forests of Colombia, way up on a ridge 5,000 feet above sea level. This city was hidden by dense foliage, way up at the top of an isolated mountain. Researchers think the city was initially founded around 800 AD, but that it was abandoned when the Spanish arrived and began their conquest. Nobody has lived in this city for at least 500 years. It's lonely and quiet, perched at the edge of a steep cliff way above the Caribbean coastline. National Geographic specialist Albert Lin worked with prestigious archaeologist Santiago Giraldo to uncover the city using LiDAR technology. And they think the civilization responsible for the concealed settlement was the Tairona. The Tairona were the dominant civilization in the Caribbean part of Colombia, specifically in the Sierra Nevada mountains. They lived at altitudes of almost 19,000 feet, but very little else is known about the Tairona except for what was documented by the Spanish invaders. The Spanish were obsessed with the gold that the Tairona had, and everyone knows how that ended. As long as gold was at stake, the Spanish pillaged, looted, and destroyed everything in their paths. The city was home to about 3,000 people at its peak, but there were maybe 10,000 people living in the forest surrounding the center of the city. Today, there isn't much left except ruins. The researchers weren't all that surprised to see that the city had been looted recently, completely stripped of anything worthwhile. Number 1. Vikings and Robin Hood. If you're a fan of fairy tales, you're likely familiar with Sherwood Forest. It's one of the most famous woodlands in the world, home to Robin Hood and his merry band of thieves. Sherwood Forest is a real forest in Nottinghamshire, though scientists are divided over whether Robin Hood was real or not. A few centuries before Robin Hood supposedly stole from the rich and gave to the poor, Sherwood Forest was occupied by a different bunch. Recent research has proven that Vikings lived in Sherwood Forest long before it became a royal hunting ground. Sherwood Forest comprises a few different woods. Birkeland's Wood is one of them, and inside its dark canopy is a place called Hanger Hill. It was at the top of the hill that archaeologists found remnants of a Viking meeting place known as an althing. An althing was where Vikings convened to discuss important community matters. It was like a parliament, where laws were enacted and disputes were settled. These days, there isn't a structure still standing. What archaeologists found was a mound of dirt and the remnants of a circular enclosure. They can't be sure that it was Vikings meeting atop Hanger Hill, but they are extremely confident in their educated guess. This could be the site of the first parliament on British soil, and proof that Sherwood Forest belonged to the Vikings, long before it ever belonged to Robin Hood. What's your favorite woodland landscape, either from the real world or fantasy? Tell us all about it in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!